The law of 7. We find there is little force for thinking about the cosmological ideas of this work, because a person lives in their own very small cosmos, which is their world view, governed mainly by self-interest. People do not as yet live even in this world, a small planet that we know as Earth. This is due to a lack of development of consciousness, as too are so many of the troubles of this planet. Consciousness in the majority of people is limited to the confined world of themselves and personal interest. We have scarcely any real consciousness of one another, and can only take in what we are vested in, so if a person is only interested in themselves and those who form their inner circle, everything said about the cosmos has little or no meaning, for it demands a form of thinking beyond oneself. A person is glued to their life, hence they have, as a rule, very little free force in them to think beyond any immediate life interests, limited by the scope of their attention span. In that case, only the most external sides of their centers are working, and thus they absorb their energies. This is sensual man of the New Testament, an individual alive only in those parts of themselves turned towards the outer 5 senses, towards subjective life. But in everyone who has magnetic center, there remains something behind, something inner, that wishes to understand more, to feel and to give, not simply to receive. For a person has far more inner sense than outer sensuality. However, these inner senses require to be developed, which begins with self-observation and inner stop, which is part of our inner conscious awareness not ordinarily used. The real or essential part of anyone, to which this work is addressed, lies behind their external sense-controlled side, and is only accessible via our inner senses. When a person begins to value this work, it is a sign that behind false personality of choice, which is the life of 5 senses created by them, there is felt some real thing, unspoiled by life, which is essence. Thoughts from personality may seem smarter, even sassy, tough or trendy as compared to essence, which are feelings from the most simple and genuine side of ourselves. However, the quality of concepts from essence are of a far higher order than those from personality. Therefore, in trying to think of the created and ordered universe, it is the simplest of things that can begin to make contact with real meaning. Take a very simple thought. Has it occurred to you in any real, vivid, private way that you are staying on the earth for a short time? Again, have you experienced the feeling that this earth is part of a solar or central system, which is part of the sun? It is such simple, vivid epiphanies that begin to connect us with the ray of creation. Creation is arranged in order, and it is ordered in a certain way. At certain points in this order, difficulties appear, and the earth is situated at just such a place where difficulties in the ordering of the stages of creation inevitably arise. It has already been noted that the primal 3 forces of creation proceed from the Absolute as their source, and in turn create further forces. We might imagine that these forces proceed downwards without check. But this is not the case. They are checked at 2 points by reason of the law of 7. So let's try to understand these points of check by means of visual representation. Imagine a tube composed of some elastic substance with 2 constrictions in it, and suppose that liquid is poured into this tube from the top. We could represent the tube as illustrated. You can see that the passage of liquid, which we could take as representing force, is held up at 2 places in its descent down the tube. We could apply this same analogy to the ray of creation as given, at the same time adding the notes do, si, la, and so on. Notice here that the first tone of the scale, namely do, has been placed at the level of the absolute, the second tone, si, at the level of world 3, the tone, la, at the level of world 6 and so on, until the note ray is reached at the level of the moon. Hence, if the major scale is taken, then 2 points are formed in it where the intervals between the notes are not full tones, but semitones. These points correspond to do, si and fa, mi. The musical scale was constructed precisely to illustrate the ray of creation by unknown wisdom keepers belonging to antiquity. It was constructed to symbolize the law of 7, or law of octaves, in terms of the musical scale, so we can speak of the interval between do and si, as the place of a missing semitone, and in the same way of the interval between fa and mi. The whole ray can therefore be called an octave, in which the absolute sounds the first do, but we do not know of the existence of the lower do. The moon always turns exactly the same side to us, not its dark side, because it is revolving and so we do not easily perceive what lies behind it. The first constriction, or place of a missing semitone, appears between the absolute and world 3, between DO and C, and the second constriction appears between world 24 and world 48, between far and me. Which means that the passage of force is held up at these two places, owing to the nature of the law of 7, where a shock of additional force is required. Between C and far, force passes freely, and again between me and Ray, but between DO and C, a check occurs, then between far and me, a second check occurs. This is in the nature of life, and arises from one of the two fundamental laws behind all things. It is not a question of why, it is simply a question of how. A fundamental law means a law that cannot be reduced further, and so cannot be explained or broken down, in terms of anything else. It's like saying that there are positive and negative charges of electricity. It is not a question of why. It is simply how, and nothing more can be said save that the law of 3 and the law of 7 are what they are. It is important to understand that if ultimately nothing were so, then nothing would exist in chaos, below or behind the level of the moon. Something must fundamentally be so for things to exist at all in an ordered manner, according to some sort of system, which is what lies within level 192, which is chaos magic or ordered chaos. You can explain the chair you are sitting on in terms of wood, and wood in terms of cells, and cells in terms of molecules, then molecules in terms of atoms, and atoms in terms of positive and negative charges. We could talk of muons or quarks and hadrons, of protons, neutrons, or neutrinos. The point is, the further we go into the microcosm, we simply move further and further in scale, to two of the forces belonging to the law of 3, and that progression is fundamental. It is so, and there is nothing beyond, save the absolute, which is the Akashic realm or 10th dimension. To reduce the universe to one law, which is the ideal of science, would be to understand the mind of the absolute. This work reduces the universe to two laws, at the same time indicating the existence of one law, which is the law of creation. The law of 7 inevitably brings about the order of created things, and produces at the same time 2 points of constriction or checks in that order, to the forces passing down the ray. How are these places of check then surmounted? The first check, between the absolute and world 3, is overcome by the shock or force of the will of the absolute. For that reason it was said that creation is by the will of the absolute through the primal 3 forces. But in the case of the second place of check in the ray of creation, the matter is different. The will of the absolute does not reach this point, or that far, and something therefore must be created to act as a shock, and it is here that mankind appears. It has been noted previously that man does not appear in the ray of creation in significant scale, only the earth appears. However, in order to enable the forces coming down the ray to pass easily to the earth and moon, an apparatus must be created, between the notes far and me, between all planets taken as one whole or 24, and the earth taken as a part, which is 48. For this purpose, a small octave is created from that level of creation externally represented by the sun, or level 12. At the level of the sun this octave sounds the note Do, or rather the sun sounds the note Do. At the level of the planets it sounds the note Si. Between the planets and the earth it sounds the 3 notes, La, So, Fa, which then passes into the earth as the note, Mi, and reaches the moon as the note Re. The 3 notes La, So, Fa, that are sounded between the planets and the earth, form organic life on earth. Organic life is a sensitive, sensory, or sense-receiving, living organism that covers the surface of the earth, where it acts as a transmitter of the forces passing between the upper and lower parts of the ray of creation. Mankind is obviously part of organic life, and it is in this specially created role, as an instrument of transmission, that we appear in the ray itself. By organic life is meant every form of life on the earth, which includes all of humanity, all animals, birds, reptiles, insects, fish, all trees, plants, every form of vegetation down to the most minute living single-cell organisms such as an amoeba, fungi, viruses, bacteria, and microbes. This sensitive film, which collects influences from the upper part of the ray of creation, and transmits them to the earth, then to the moon, is created from the level of the sun, and its appearance in the great ray of creation is due precisely to that point of check, where a shock is needed between the notes Fa and Mi, arising from the nature of the law of 7. When this system is presented in a simple and formal way, the ray of creation is given in terms of the external universe. But the ray is a principle that when applied to the external universe gives the different levels of the starry masses, the sun, planets and moons in their descending order. It can be understood in this way. So when, for example, it is said that the sun creates a suboctave which forms organic life on Earth, it should be understood literally. But the ray represents levels of being, and is internal as well as external. That is, the sun represents, in that external meaning of the ray, the actual sun. In the internal meaning it represents beings, at that level in the vertical scale of being. However you can understand it as you wish to begin with, either literally or psychologically, for the two correspond. Different levels in the external universe are simply representations or avatars of different levels of intelligence which are internal or psychological. If we speak of the intelligence of the sun, understand that it is higher than the intelligence of the earth, simply from external representation, for the sun has infinitely more energies, solar flares and radiation than the earth. But the ray should be understood in both senses, for outer and inner correspond, and everything internal has something corresponding to it externally. This can be noticed in our use of language. We speak of internal or psychological things in terms of external or visible objects. We call a cunning individual a fox, or a brave person a lion. A patient disposition is compared with the tortoise in analogy. Because outer and inner have a similar source, they therefore represent one another, for as noted, the fundamental laws, the law of 3 and the law of 7, are found everywhere in nature and in mankind. For this reason, complex psychological ideas can be represented in visual imagery, drawn from outer objects, as in the case of any parable. For the same reason, to take man apart from the universe in which he is born is erroneous. The universe is the macrocosmos and man is a microcosm. Man is in the universe, and the universe is in man, as above, so below. To say then that the universe is dying, and man is evolving, is an absurdity from the standpoint of this work. The ray of creation represents a descending octave. It descends into greater and greater obscurity, complexity and restrictions, the further it proceeds from the absolute. The idea of an ascending octave from the absolute is impossible, for the absolute is all goodness and all perfection. An ascending octave would logically imply increasing perfection. We can speak briefly of the law of 7 or the law of the octaves from a psychological standpoint. One can observe octaves in oneself, or rather we can observe the beginnings of octaves. Everything that we set out to do can be called the beginning of an octave. When we decide to do something, we sound do. If this do is weakly sounded, then nothing happens and we simply keep scrolling, sounding a feeble do, like sonar. But if it is sounded more strongly we can reach the note ray, and even the note mi. However here we reach the place of missing semitone, and hear it precisely where a shock is required, to enable us to reach the note fa. This rarely happens, and may even happen accidentally, but as a rule it does not happen. That is why in this work it is said that life is full of broken octaves. People start so many things and then give them up. Remember that mankind is created a self-developing organism, and that means that we only develop through effort, through feeling and through will, for all evolution of man is conscious and through conscious, directed effort. There is no mechanical evolution, and we need not be surprised to find many difficulties in our journey. The law of 7 makes things difficult by its very nature, it's nothing personal. Returning then to the suboctave between the sun and moon. This octave, created by the intelligence of the sun, sounds 3 notes on the earth, la, so, fa, which represent the living mechanism called organic life on earth, of which mankind is part. At present we will not speak of the meaning of the different notes of this suboctave. What must be understood is that mankind does not appear in the great octave of creation, but in the suboctave proceeding from the sun. Humanity is a special creation within the ray, so let's try to understand why, and what the point is, of a suboctave in this case. The reason the intelligence of the sun creates this suboctave is to fill the gap, or place of missing semitone between fa and mi in the great ray, due to the nature of the law of 7. Unless something were created at this point, the force passing down the ray from the absolute could not pass freely to the earth and moon. Some sort of shock is necessary at this point, owing to the nature of the law of 7. This law governs the order of creation, and brings about conditions at certain points where something must be added in the nature of a shock. The law of 7 can sometimes then be referred to as the law of shocks. Certain shocks are required at certain points in the unfolding, progress or evolution of anything. The intelligence of the Earth or the planets is not great enough to create anything to act as a shock at this point. The intelligence of the Sun is needed. But the Sun, in creating the suboctave, has two objectives that it is essential to grasp. One objective is to create a sensitive transmitting instrument between the notes fa and mi of the great ray, to enable creative force to pass to the Earth and then to the Moon at the termination of the ray. From this point of view, organic life, including man, exists only for the purposes of the ray, and its creation is due to the nature of the law of seven, which causes certain difficult or narrow places to appear in the order of creation. This serves the purposes of great nature and is its objective. However, if this were the only objective, then our situation would be solely as part of this transmitting apparatus, and we would always serve the ray and its evolution, as sheeple, which takes place over immense periods of time, on great scale. The other objective is connected with the aims of the Sun itself, and its own evolution. In creating the suboctave, the Sun is not merely creating on behalf of the great ray, to fill a missing space, but is also acting for itself. The Sun wants something apart from the needs of the ray of creation. It is here that the possibilities of man are found. So reflect on this, which is fundamentally important to understanding this work. The intelligence of the Sun wants something for itself in creating mankind on Earth, quite apart from the necessities of the great ray. So what does it want? It wants man to ascend from the level of the Earth to the level of the Sun. For this reason it creates mankind as something incomplete, as an unfinished being. In what sense incomplete? With regard to being part of organic life on Earth, serving the purposes of the ray of creation, we are complete, and nothing more is required of us than the life that we ordinarily lead mechanically. We are capable of living on Earth just as we are, and in this, it is said in the work that we serve the grand magician, which is great nature. However, with regard to our real origin from the octave of the Sun, we have another destiny locked within us, and in this our destiny remains unfinished, incomplete, because the intelligence of the Sun has created us for some other reason, and has put in us, apart from what is necessary to serve nature, other powers and possibilities. We have in us far more than is necessary for the purposes of serving the great ray. In speaking of nature here, what is meant is all life on Earth, all that we see around us on the Earth, the life of plants, animals, trees, fish, insects, down to the bacteria in our gut and the viruses in our bloodstream, which embody and enable the life of humanity. Along with all of our struggles, all the killing, pain, birth and death, which together make up this perpetual motion mechanism called organic life, created by the Sun to transmit influences from the upper to the lower part of the ray of creation. This second objective, however, where we are created upon the Earth is incomplete, in order that we may develop up to the level of being represented by the Sun. In this sense we are created as a self-developing organism, an experiment of the Sun placed here for its aim and purposes. We can remain of course asleep and serve organic life, or we can awaken and serve the Sun. If we had been created with the same being and intelligence as the Sun, then we would not be here on the Earth. Mankind has therefore two explanations or two reasons for being. We are created to serve nature, to be part of organic life, and in this sense it is not in the interests of nature that we should develop any further and so cease to serve our mother. But man is also created to develop himself, until he reaches the level of the Sun.